Hello, everyone, and welcome to my new show, Out of Nowhere. Well, my special guest today is Grant Cameron. Grant's a UFO investigator, including talking to Vice President Dick Cheney, advising private individuals related to the briefing for Donald Trump's first chief of staff, and doing 2 interviews for the National Inquiry. He's an author and he's done loads, but all will be revealed tonight on this show. Can we please welcome Grant to the show? Hello there.
How you doing, Bob? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate your interest in what I'm doing.
Good evening.
Yeah, can you
Thank
hear
you
me?
very much. It's so nice to have you here as well.
Good,
How? Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
good.
How did it all start for you then?
It was 1975. I was about 21 years old, and we used to drive around. I live in a big major city, about 700,000 people. My friend and I used to drive around the city and just sort of do nothing. And some reporting starting to come from a town about 35 miles southwest called Carmen. And they were talking about this UFO was there all the time, and people were seeing it. It was called Charlie Red Star. So I said to my friend, this was February of 1975. I said, "Hey, let's go see what they're looking at. Instead of driving around the city, why don't we drive out there and see what's going to, if anything happens?" And I always describe it as buying the lottery ticket. If you buy a lottery ticket, you know you can win, but you're not going to win. It's just you just got a chance, but you're not going to win. So we didn't go because I had no interest in UFOs. I'd never thought about UFOs, never thought about extraterrestrials or anything. And then about 3 months later, a local TV station captured this thing jumping from the ground to 5,000 feet in the air in 1/8 of a second. And they got it on film. So they played the film and they were showing it frame by frame, and it was a big story. And so I said to my friend, "Come on, let's go see what they're looking at." And so in May of 1975, we drove out there, and we drove into town, out of the town, drove around, and for an hour and didn't see anything, and trying to figure out, what were people looking at? What's everybody talking about? And we thought, well, whatever it is not very impressive. I mean, we looked at stars and planets, and I don't know what they're looking at. Just like, so my friend said, "Okay, we'll drive into town one more time. If we don't see anything, let's go home." I said, "Okay, fantastic. This has been a total waste of time." We turned the car to go back into town from the west side of that town, and the thing flew right in front of the car. And nobody in the car said, "Is that it? Is that what they're looking at? I wonder if that's what it was." Everybody just went, "There it is." It's like, oh, there. It's like so bizarre. And it's so the impression I got up to today, because I had two very close sightings the first two times I was there. It was like the phenomena wanted me to make sure that I never doubted that there was ever sightings. So I've never really done sightings. I've never been interested in sightings. I wrote a book on this town about all the people who had seen it. And I remember the local publisher, who should have published it because it was a pretty famous story, said to me, "Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers." That's what she said to publish my book. And I went, wow. So I said, forget the sightings. I said, I'm a young, guy in Canada, and I really know what's going on, but somebody's got to know what's going on here. So then I chased the Canadian government, what they were doing in the 1950s. That led to the former president of Penn State University, Dr. Eric Walker, who was the highest level official that anybody's ever talked to on UFOs. He was the chairman of the Institute for Defense Analysis, which is the top military think tank in the United States. And he was on the board of trustees in 1958 when they created DARPA. That's where DARPA came from. It came from the Institute for Defense Analysis. So this guy was right at the beginning. When we talked to him, but when he first got interviewed about MJ12, he said, "I've known about them for 40 years. Leave it alone. You're up against the windmills. You're wasting your time. Go study something else." And so he sort of gave us some hints as to what's going on. And then I was trying to find his files at the Presidential Library, at the Truman Library, because he had indicated that some of his files were going to go there. And so I wanted to see if these files from when he was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Weapons in 1950. So I wanted to see if those files were there. I went to the Truman Library, and they had a couple of files, but nothing to do with UFOs with Walker. And that's when I said to the archivist, I said, "So the president's the most powerful guy in the world. So what do you got on UFOs?" And then the guy said, "Oh, we got the I think it was 15 pages or 20 pages, and most of them were telegrams from 1952 when the UFOs were flying over Washington. And all these people were sending telegrams to the president saying, 'Don't shoot him down. Don't shoot him down, Mr. President.'" So that's all they had. And I said, "That's all you got?" So then I went to the Eisenhower Library, which is just down the road, a couple hours down the road. And I asked them, I said, "Well, what do you got on UFOs?" and they said, we got 5 documents. And one was the famous CIA Robertson panel report, but otherwise it was just junk. I mean, it's just somebody's, some contactee sending in a telegram or something. And that's when I asked him, I said, how many pages you got in this library? And he said, 28 million pages of files. I said, 28 million pages, and you got 5 on UFOs? And that's when I started this pursuit of the president of the United States to see, what does the president know? It's my original thing. Somebody's got to know what's going on here. And it wasn't until I sort of ran into the experiencers. I heard Colin Andrews' lecture in about, it was 2012 in February. And I had this download experience that sort of told me, this is all consciousness. This is what it's about. And I moved away from sightings and moved away. And I went to the contactees, the people that claim that they're interacting with the intelligence. So I spent a lot of time with them. And I spend a lot of time basically looking at the nature of reality.
Yeah, what do you think their agenda is then?
Well, the more I look at it, the more I think this may not be ET. It's much more complex than ET. If you start talking to people, they're starting to throw the words around. When I started in 1975, it was very simple. It was ET. And I looked at it because it was the second time it was flying. It flew at me and then it flew away from me. And I'm looking at it and I said, it could be an extraterrestrial from another planet. But the more you look and talk to contactees, people are starting to use the word interdimensionals, non-human intelligence. And Jim Semivan, who is this famous high-level CIA guy who had the experience with the beings being in his room, he basically said, there does not appear to be any there. And that is one of the most significant things anybody ever said. So here's a guy who got the briefing. He knows where the legacy programs are. And he said, there does not appear to be any there. This seems to be on the edges of quantum mechanics and consciousness. And so when you start to look at it, because people say, they got bodies and crafts. And I've said that since I wrote my first book in 1989 that got published. That was UFOs Area 51 and Government Informants, when I talked about Dr. Walker. And they've got the bodies and crafts, but that doesn't mean that they're extraterrestrial. That just means they got bodies and crafts. And where they're coming from, that's why I think part of the cover-up is they really don't know. There's a phenomena that's engaging. There's even high-level officials, like, for example, Hal Puthoff, who, Kit Green, who was the CIA, ran the weird desk at the CIA, and Jacques Vallée got together at a Denny's restaurant in the 1980s, early 1980s. And that's when they tried to determine, what is this? Like, what's going on? There's a lot of garbage going around the UFO community. What do we know for sure? And they came up with what's called the core story. The core story is we're being interacted by some sort of intelligence. We've got hardware and recovered hardware, and we're not doing very well back engineering the covered hardware. That's all they know. And so that's what this pursuit is about. And you can even get people like where they go to high-level officials that went to my friend Chris Bledsoe's house. And this is like CIA, NSA, Office of Navy Intelligence, the satellite people, NASA. And so Chris said to Tim Taylor, who's a NASA guy, and he said, so what are you doing here? My kids, we got one kid quit school. They're being harassed by people. This is horrible. My family's going through all this trauma. Like, what are you guys doing on my property? Like, what's the deal here? And then Tim said to me, Chris, it appears that you've got contact with whatever this is. You've got a contact. They seem to like you, Chris. They don't like us. They don't talk to us. So we're here. We're here to find out what they're telling you. And that's what one of the other high-level officials I follow, Ron Pandolfi, had said. Because we cannot control the phenomena, we watch those that the phenomena interacts with. Lights in the sky have limited scientific evidence. And that's the idea, is there's a bunch of people who are walking around who are interacting with this phenomena, and I don't think they know what it is either. They get told that they're extraterrestrials. There's a famous story I always tell that sort of gets this idea that may not be extraterrestrial. And I don't know if you've ever interviewed Sherry Wilde, but Sherry Wilde wrote a book called The Forgotten Promise. She was one of the biggest cases that QFOS ever had. The top regressionist person in Illinois regressed her, and she had this encounter with a being that she called Da. So she wrote this book called The Forgotten Promise, that she had promised to do this. And then she was fighting them all the time, and then Da had said to her, don't you remember the promise you made? You agreed to do this. And they want her to write this book. And she says, I'm not writing your damn book. No, I'm not writing your book. And then they basically sort of coaxed her, and she finally wrote the book, and she took it to the publisher. And when she was at the publisher's, she gave it to the publisher. And then he said, you're dealing with Da? Is he a Zeta? And she said, yeah. And yet he said he's from Andromeda. And she said, yeah, he's from Andromeda. And he said, and then the publisher said, well, if he's from Andromeda, he can't be a gray. The grays are from Zeta Reticuli. And she said, really? She didn't really know. She said, really? And so he says, the next time Doc comes, ask him what's going on. So Doc comes and she has this encounter with him. And she said, so what's going on? Are you actually an extraterrestrial? And what he said, quote, no, that would not best describe what I actually am. I'm an etheric being on a mission in the cosmos for the creator. And she says, well, why do you come as this ugly looking gray thing? And he said, what? You think we look ugly? And she said, well, yeah, you scare me. And every time you block my memory. And so every time you come, you scare the living daylights out of me because I don't remember who you are. And then he said, so you think we look ugly? Do you ever look in the mirror, Sherry? And she said, what do you mean? And she's got big teeth. So he says, when you smile, we think you're going to eat us. so this is the idea that when you confront us. So I talked to people on it. There's one girl I was just in contact with this morning. She's the first abductee ever. She was before Betty and Barney Hill. She was in July of 1961. Her name is Nancy Tremaine. And she's her being was called Mr. I asked her as well. Ask Mr. Is he an extraterrestrial? And when people confront them and say, are you extraterrestrial or where are you from? You'll hear these stories. You wouldn't understand. So the question is, if they're from an extraterrestrial planet, if they're from Mars or Venus or from Zeta Reticuli, what's there to not understand? And people hear this all the time. You wouldn't understand, which is what I say people got to keep in mind, that this may be more complex than extraterrestrials. It's the idea that we are etheric beings. Remember who you actually are. You are not a human being. Because you played King Henry VIII in grade 12 high school in a play doesn't mean you're now King Henry VIII. You're a puppet on a stage. And when you leave the stage, as Shakespeare says, all the world's a stage. All the men and women are but actors. They have their entrances and exits, and each man plays many roles. So we come on, we play this role. You're Bob, I'm Grant. We're going to do this kind of stuff. But that's not who we are. When we leave, we realize we are these other things. So they can come in as there's an experiencer by the name of Yossi Ronan out of Israel. And he had these beings who were green beings. And he talked to them, and they said, when we come into your world, we take on a body. We have to take on a body in order to work in your world. We don't have to do that. We can take on whatever kind of body we want. You can do the same thing. You just don't know it. And so that's the whole idea. They're coming in and they're portraying themselves like if you go back to the 1890s when they were the airships of the Western United States. There was guys hanging off of ropes with beards and they were talking these rhymes and riddles. And they asked them, where are you from? And they said, from Mars. And so I say to people, if you believe this is actually extraterrestrial, do you actually believe that these wooden ships in 1896 and 1897 flew through the vacuum of space on these wooden ships from Mars? That they weren't from Mars, but so they play it whatever your mentality is. So now we're in the space age, and they will go according to the space age. Which, if you look at the humanoid reports, if you look before 1961, there was no grays. If you look at the catalog of reports, and I've got the whole list of them, somebody did a whole book on them. You'll see beings with bubble helmets. Like that's right out of 1930s and 1940s science fiction. They had bubble helmets. They had stuff like that. So they portray according to what you do. In fact, there's a guy by the name of Chris Waters. He's the stepson to Barbara Streisand. He's a full-blown experiencer. And what he told me is that what they told him is, Chris, when we come into your world, we go into your head and we see whatever's in your head, whatever's in your mind. That's what we use to create a lesson for you. We have no other choice. So they come in and they see what's your belief system, and according to your belief system, you will interpret things. And that's what people don't really realize, is that you're part of the experience. You think it's an independent experience, independent of you. You are part of the experience. And so you have this idea that people who are in fear will see grays. People who are very religious will see etheric type beings. For example, I did 2 books on the Mission Rama group out of it's in a Latino group. There's 25,000, and they have these things where they're able to open these portals. They call them Zendras. And I say to people, if you actually believe that the Greys are running the show, you go to these 25,000 people, and they've got a lot of experiences. They record every experience they've got from 1974 when they started. And you will not find a gray, you will not find a reptilian, and you will never find a mantid. They don't. Their beings are they got the long hair like out of the Bible. They're all muscular, look like they're swimmers, with these tight things. They're 10 feet tall. You will never see grays. And so that's the thing. The Mission Rama people will see one type of being. If you're in America, you're going to see this gray thing, and it's fearful, and they're doing this and that. And so the more I go, the more I think that it's going to be a little more complex than people think. It's not going to be very simple that they're from another planet. Otherwise, they would actually tell us they're from another planet instead of saying, you wouldn't understand where we're from. We won't get into that.
So they use our consciousness then.
Yeah, and that's what we see is that I say one of the mistakes we make is we have perceived reality. That I will say that when it comes right down to it, everything you perceive is going to be wrong. We saw the world is flat. Why? Because it looked flat. The sun goes around the earth, and we still say the sun rises and sun sets, and that is because it looks like that way. And we make these measurements and stuff, and we can predict when the sun's coming up. That doesn't mean the sun's going around the earth. Until 1911, we actually believed that the atom was solid until they did the gold foil experiment in 1911. And now we're starting to realize through quantum physics and what the experiencers are telling us is that time and space
Playing.
are probably illusions. Are you still there?
We're back on again.
Okay. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff that we perceive is not going to be right. And one of the books I refer to people now to go. I talk about this. Most of my books now are about the nature of reality and consciousness and stuff like that. But if you look, there's a book that was just written on comas, on people that go into comas, like during COVID, they put these people in these long induced comas, and you think that the people aren't thinking, they're just sleeping. They're not. These people have these horrific visions. And the one woman said she was gone for 60 years and she had 4 children. And she said, different than near-death experience. Near-death experience people say that it was more real than the real world. These people is even worse. They say, this was not an illusion. This was not a hallucination. This actually happened to me. And they claim that they were gone for 80 years and they had 4 children. And the one person said they were gone for 100,000 years. And they were in a coma for 2 weeks. And that's the whole thing. So is this the dream or is that the dream? Because they'll maintain that, no, this actually happened to them. Same with DMT, the psychedelic DMT. You'll hear this often. People are gone for 10 minutes. The trip lasts 10 minutes, and people will say, I was gone 1,000 years. So the thing is, time and space, if you look at the spooky action at a distance that Einstein looked at, if that's true, if you can have 2 particles on either side of the universe and you touch one and the other one reacts, then time and space may not exist. And the latest book I wrote was called UFO Sky Pilots, where I look at 36 people who claim that they've flown the craft, and they all say the same thing. The craft is alive. You touch the craft with your hand. You become one with the craft, whatever you think is what the craft does, and that you can go from here to the other side of the galaxy instantaneously. And the beings will say, imagine it in your mind, Bob. When you can imagine it in your mind, then push the button. And the people will do that. And boom, they're on the other side of the galaxy. And if that's true, these people are not lying. There's a lot of people. They are not lying. They're not hallucinating. That means we got something wrong with our ideas about time and space, that the beings come, or the other thing that is very important I point out to people is 40% of all experiencers say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. I've had that experience with psychedelics. And if you look at people with out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences, 31% will say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe, which means if the beings are allowing you to, at one point during your experience, to see everything in the universe, the beings are not here to study plants and stuff like that. They know the answer to everything, because if they give you access to it, they must have access. And that's the idea that everything is in the field. Everything is happening here and now. There is no time and space. It's happening here and now. You're living all your lives at the same time. And the universe is just a singularity. That's the kind of stuff that I think the government is covering up, that they just don't want to say, you guys haven't got a clue what's going on, because it would just shatter everybody's reality as to what's going on if you suddenly realize that most of the stuff you see is not real. You're actually sort of like we see colors. There are no colors. It's all electromagnetic waves. It's all this quantum stuff, and stuff is coming in and going out of reality. And that's what quantum physics is now saying. And yet it looks like it's solid. People say it's solid. It's not solid. It's almost all space. And that's what the beings, I think, are trying to move us slowly, but they're forcing us to do it. They're not going to land and give us a lecture, because that's what we do. That's our idea. We go into another country and we say, we're here to bring you freedom, democracy, Jesus, and McDonald's. And then the people in the countries point guns at them and say, get the hell out of my country. Like, what do you think you are? So the beings aren't doing that. They're not going to interfere with us. They're doing these little breadcrumb things. They're giving experiencers little stories. They're telling the stories. And as you go along, gradually you'll see the ideas change as to what's actually going on.
Why do some people can communicate with aliens and some people can't?
That comes down to consciousness. So I talk about consciousness. I wrote a book called Contact Modalities, where I look at 71 different modalities that people will use in order to make contact. So the idea is everything's in the field. All the answers are there. All the inventions are there. Everything's there. Or as Neil Donald Walsh, he's a famous channeler, said, God talks to everybody. Only certain people are listening. So what you'll see is an event, for example, somebody has a near-death experience. You go through the front windshield of your car and you have this near-death experience, and suddenly you're talking to God, and you realize the answer to everything in the universe and stuff like that. And that's the whole thing. So what I say, it's the ability to shut down the left brain. So if you're doing hypnosis, one of the modalities is doing hypnosis. One is psychedelics. One is meditation. You're doing the same thing every single time. What you're doing is you're shutting down the default mode network. And even at London College, or Imperial College in London, they do these experiments where they show this sort of stuff that uh, when you get into these states, the default mode network shuts down. That's the left side of the brain. That's the side that has the ego in it. So when you can shut the ego down, you can get in the field. So what's happening now? We're moving from the left brain, the male, me versus you. Let's have a war. Let's fight. Let's have a urinating contest and stuff like that. Me versus you, separation, and we're going into the right brain, the female brain, of unity, oneness, love, all this kind of stuff. And the left brain is you'll see that almost all contact modalities are the same thing. It's the ability to shut the left brain down. So the signal is there for everybody. God is talking to everybody, but only certain people can pick up the signal. So how do you want to pick up the signal? Meditate. Stop worrying about thinking about yourself and the ego and stuff like that. And when you can shut the ego down, whether it's through meditation or hypnosis or through a near-death experience or whatever it is, the ego shuts down and suddenly you can pick up the signal. The noise is gone and you pick up the signal. The signal is there. Only certain people are picking up the signal because they're able. So you'll see. I wrote a book on music called "Tuned In: The Paranormal World of Music," and what you'll see is almost all musicians. And I go through musicians who got songs in dreams, like Paul McCartney got "Yesterday" in a dream. He got the song "No Regrets" in a dream. His mother came to him in a dream, and the song "Let It Be." And almost all musicians are right-brained. Most of them are not not left brain. Left brain music is memorizing music. It's playing a music, playing notes. Right brain music is people like the Beatles, the Stones, all these people. Most major musicians cannot read and write music. They're in the right brain. They're not just practice and memorize and stuff like that. So you'll see musicians that get songs, and the question is, how can a musician get a song in under 5 minutes? Very famous songs, some of the most famous songs in the world, or in dreams and stuff like that. And that's because their left brain is shut down. They're in the field and they get this song, and they come back and they can actually write the whole thing down and bring it into the world. Same with psychics and stuff like that. They're shutting down the left brain. Their right brain is in contact with the universe and all the materials there, and they're downloading it.
There's a question from Alison. Hi, Grant. Why are they experimenting on people and animals?
Well, that's a good question. That gets into the whole hybrid thing. We always got to remember that we're part of it, that it may actually be us, that we've made an agreement to do this, that you've got to increase the DNA, you've got to change the DNA. This Tim Taylor guy from NASA said that the DNA is the signal. That's how we pick up the signal. And there are some NASA satellites or antennas that are actually made like DNAs. That's the way. And hair is also used. So we have this situation where we experiment on animals and we think, oh, that's fine. We can experiment on animals. Or they say, well, they'll kill a cow, or the cattle mutilation stuff. So people say, well, why would they mutilate cattle? And we've got to remember, in the United States of America, we mutilate and totally destroy 40 million cows a year. And we said, that's okay. We're eating cows. I mean, what's the big deal? And when you see, so you start looking at what's the pattern. So you see, and there's a guy by the name of, and I'm going to forget his name. He's got the biggest collection of cattle mutilation, Perkins. His last name is Perkins, but he has the catalog of the most. And what he says is all cattle mutilations are downwind and downstream from nuclear power activities. And so you see on the Western Plain, you don't see him in California, you see him on the east of the Rockies. And that's where we did all the nuclear tests at Area 51. We detonated all these atomic bombs in the atmosphere and stuff like that. And what you'll see, it even started about this thing about the high rates of cancer. If you overlay the higher rates of cancer on those states, Colorado, Montana, and places like that, New Mexico, what you'll see is that the rate of cancer matches where the cattle mutilations were. But the cattle mutilations have stopped. So people say, and I don't know why that is, but the beings, I have a theory, and it's a book I'll eventually write called The Theory of Wow, where what the phenomena is doing is not really doing anything. It's just making you think. So it does these weird things. Like, why do UFOs have lights on them, Bob? They have lights on them so you can see them. We don't have lights on our planes. Why would they have lights on their planes? They want you to see it. They want you to go, what the heck is going on? What's going on here? And because in science is not until you have awe and curiosity that you're going to do any experiments. As long as you think you know all the answers, there's no point in doing new experiments. It's when you get, as Gary Nolan said, I'm not interested in the 95% of experiments data that falls was inside the curve. I'm only interested in the 5% outside the curve. That's when the Nobel Prizes are. So when you get a paranormal phenomena happen, whether it's cattle mutilation, whether it's a crop circle, whether it's an abduction or lights in the sky, what they want you to is being on curiosity. Is trying to figure out what's going on. So then you start spending money and to research to try to figure out what's going on. And there was even an experiment, a channeling that was done with the famous theologian Martin Luther. And in this seance thing, they asked Martin Luther, they said, why does God not present himself? It's the same question of why are the aliens doing what they're doing? Well, why does God not get off his big fat rear end and come down and help us and do stuff? And it's because that's not how it works. He wants you to do it. So they do these weird things. And Martin Luther said, because doubt is how it works. When you have doubt, when you get curious and you try to figure it out, that's when you figure it out. And we do so much when you can't do your kid's homework. If you do your kid's homework, he's never going to learn anything. If you go write his exams for him, what's he going to learn? If you go to school for him, what's he going to learn? You have to go through that process of learning. So I think a lot of this is learning. And what you'll see is the patterns keep changing. You had no crop circles when I started in 75. And then you guys got the crop circles. What's a crop circle? Like every single one is different. Same as every single UFO is different. And I'll maintain every single alien is different. And every person is different. Even in identical twins are different. They have different fingerprints and stuff like that. And what you're getting is that they're putting this stuff out. And we're busy playing this little game because when you go back into the spirit world, you know everything. You have all the answers. You know how it all fits together. And then you agree to come back in another time and you go through the river of forgetfulness and you got to forget all the answers. Otherwise, what's the point? And you come in and the illusion is so strong. You play this thing. And that's what we're doing is we're doing this duality thing where we're all these things are going on. We're playing this role. So you get an experiment. People say, why doesn't everything all perfect? Why doesn't everything just go perfect? Well, because God comes down to a movie theater with his popcorn and he goes in and everybody goes, I love you, Bob. And then Bob goes, I love you. And 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 then God says, oh, this is boring. I'm getting out of here. And he goes to the next one where there's Star Wars and just, all this stuff going on. And there's all this stuff. And that's what it's about. It's this, the duality gives it that sort of action type thing. And if you come in with all the answers and you know everything, there's no point to being alive. And so the illusion is very strong, and we believe that there's actually a physical world out there, and we believe this is all happening, and we take it very seriously and get upset. But I think that's what the beings are trying to do. They're trying to move us to the next lesson, and a lot of the experiences will say, that's my family. I agreed to this. I came in. I'm one of them. I came to the world to help, to, as Sherry Wilde said, called the Forgotten Promise, where she was taken and she was devastated. I mean, she was horrified by what was going on with her. She just, because they were doing the 1, 2, 3, 4, where her clock would always be 1, 2, 3, 4, and she was driving her nuts. She was just like insane. And she was in a small town in Wisconsin where she was being ridiculed. She was a real estate agent, and her daughters took out an injunction to stop her from telling her story because they're going to ruin the real estate business. And that was the whole thing. So she was devastated. And yet she was putting this message out for them. And then she told me the story. I remember the weird story where she's in her car, and then she said there's this TV screen in the car, and she's looking and she's going, what are you doing? It's like, duh, what are you doing? I'm driving a car. Can't you see I can't watch the TV screen? And she says, by the way, what is that? And she said it looks pretty cool. And there was this little girl, she was hugging this tree, and that was her as a little child. And Dawes says, That's the first scene to your movie. So now they want her to do a movie. And that's what they want. They want you to go and tell the story. They want experiences. And you'll hear experiencers say that all the time, that the being tells them, you got to write a book. You got to go and tell people. They want, and what happens is, as people tell stories, more and more stories, the consciousness rises. And then suddenly everybody knows what Area 51 is. Everybody knows what a UFO is. Everybody knows what a near-earth experience is. Everybody knows what Skinwalker Ranch is. And you may not believe it, but what happens is, as Max Planck, who the father of quantum physics, said, Max Planck says, you do not advance by convincing your opponent that you're right. Science advances one funeral at a time. Your opponents die, and the next generation is not offended with the idea. So that's what's happening. The ideas are coming, and people know Area 51. They may say, oh, I don't believe in near-earth experiences. I don't believe in Skinwalker, but they know what Skinwalker is. And then the young kids go, yeah, sure, that's real. And that's what happens. The old people die off, and all these ideas will become known, and everybody will accept them. And it's just a matter of time. That's what they're doing. They're raising the consciousness to a point, almost like where gay marriage or something, where it just sort of flips. And then you say, when did gay marriage become acceptable? And everybody goes, I don't know, 20 years ago, 25. People really don't know. It just happened, and people just don't realize what happened. Same as the UFO thing. Now most people accept, yeah, there's UFOs. And then when 2017, I wrote an article in 2009 that talked about the 64 reasons the government decided not to tell you the truth. And some of the reasons were the stock market will melt down, all this sort of stuff. And in 2017, the New York Times came forward and said, oh, by the way, the government is doing UFO research. And everybody went, yeah, I knew that already. It's like they've been acclimatized. They knew it already. It's like, but if you went 20 years before that, they wouldn't have. And that's what's going to happen. The same when they say, oh, there are extraterrestrials or whatever they're going to say. People are going, I knew that already, because they're putting it in movies. They're putting it in, stuff like that. They're doing this acclimatization thing to raise people's consciousness so that when it happens, people just accept it.
I want to touch on shadow people and hooded figures. What we know face show up in your bedroom.
Yeah.
What are they? What are shadow people?
Well, again, we may be manifesting this stuff because people will say, oh, there's UFOs and shadow people. I remember Chris Bledsoe. So Chris Bledsoe is my friend, good friend. And I remember I was at his house. This is where they cut the dog. I don't know if you know the story. They cut the dog and the blood's all over the place, all over my pants and stuff. It's a real bizarre paranormal story. Anyway, so after this happened, then we're talking about who cut the dog, who cut the dog's neck. And then he said, oh, it was the shadow people. I said, shadow people? Why would the shadow people cut the dog's neck? And he said, well, they're evil. I said, well, how do you know they're evil? He said, well, they're dark. So because they're dark doesn't mean they're evil. In fact, if you see the latest interview with Lukatsky, with George Knapp, Lukatsky ran the OSAP program, and he says, we now can confirm there are men in black. And then he said, but they're not what you think they are. They're using reverse psychology. They're trying to drag you in because it's the same thing. Awe and curiosity. You're going, there was some guy at my door and he looked really weird and he was doing a poll and I don't know who this guy was. And his clothes were 20 years out of date and stuff. And it gets you curious. And you go, what's going on? You start to investigate it. So that's what a lot of the shadow people stuff is. But people don't realize it happens in all phenomena. It happens in ghost phenomena. It happens all in all sorts of phenomena. So I remember when I was talking to Chris and he said, well, he believed it was evil. I said, no, you know why they cut the dog? And he said, no, why? I said, because the Warner Brothers wants to do a movie about your story. Mel Gibson wanted to do a movie. They're going to have Julia Roberts as part of this movie. It's a big money movie. They're going to do Chris Bledsoe's UFO story. And then I said that they did the dog because they want something really weird. They did this thing where the dog, they cut it, and then suddenly Chris healed the dog, and then the dog was okay. And I said that they want this in the movie. They want this really weird story. It's like the idea of God walking in with his popcorn. They want this really weird thing where people go, "Can you believe that they cut this dog?" Because people ask me all that. Did that really happen? I said, "Yeah, it really happened. It was right. I was right there, and the blood was all over my pants." And then Chris said, "No, I don't think so." And then 2 weeks later, he said, "You still got those photographs?" Because I was filming the whole thing while this dog was being healed. And he said, "You still got those photographs?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, could I get them? Warner Brothers wants to see them." I go, "I told you." And I said, "Who's playing me in the movie?" So that's what they're doing. And I even asked Chris. I said, "Hey, Chris, did you see the shadow guy with the hat?" And he said, "Yeah, I saw that guy." And I said, and I said, if you're in a shadow world, what do you need a hat for? And there was even some Aboriginals here. We have a lot of reserves here. And I remember there was a federal police officer. There was a film crew, and we were too close to a railway track, and the federal police came, and they were talking to us, and he was an Aboriginal guy. And so we said, "Oh, we're doing this UFO thing, and we're filming and stuff." Hey, really? And he got all excited. He said, "Hey, you're going to study the shadow people in the Aboriginal culture," and they got the big hat. And I said, "They got the hat?" He said, "Oh yeah." And that's the whole thing. So why do you need a hat? It's almost like this thing where they play this thing, and what it's trying to do is trying to get you curious. It's trying to get you to explore. And again, it's this idea that if you're in fear, you're going to see very scary things. Like people will talk about the Ouija boards. Oh, your Ouija board, and this evil thing showed up. The Ouija board is nothing. The Ouija board is just a tool. That's all it is. It's your mind. So if you go onto the Ouija board and your mind is in the gutter, guess what's going to happen? It's the same thing as a psychedelic experience. Wherever your mind is, that's where they're going to take you. And it doesn't really matter. You're going to learn something. And so you can, if your mind is, it's called co-resonance. So whatever you're resonating with, that's what you're going to manifest. And so people who are manifesting shadow people happen all over the place. I remember there was a famous guy that was abducted. I talked to his wife, and I said, "Do you have shadow people?" And she starts laughing. She says, "Of course we do. You want some photographs?" And she gave me some photographs of these shadow people, same as a ranch right beside Skinwalker Ranch. We got these shadow people, just bizarre. One with the hat on, and it was picked up on surveillance cameras on this ranch right beside Skinwalker Ranch. So it happens all over the place, but nobody figures it out. That's the whole idea. They don't want you to figure it out. It's not meant to figure out. It's to make you real, it's to shatter reality. It's to make you say, the world can't work the way it does. I mean, if you can go from here to the other side of the galaxy instantaneously, something's wrong with our physics. And that's what gets people curious. And these shadow people, what are these shadow people? People start investigating, and we keep digging around. And that's when we get into the idea that it's not the world you think it is. That's what they're trying to tell us. It's different. And you've got to explore. You've got to go into the next realm of ideas. As Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem using the same information that you use to create the problem. You've got to get new information in there, and that's what they're doing. They're making us curious. They're making us do all these weird things, because some of the stuff they do is absolutely insane. Where I wrote a whole book called Weird, and that's on reports and manifestations. And that happens a lot in seances, like in Britain, where stuff will fall out of the ceiling. And I remember the one guy, I asked him, I said, "Hey," he's talking about his UFO experience. I said, "Hey, you ever anything fly around the house or something drop out of the ceiling?" He said, Can I stop for a second? I got to go in the next room. And he comes back, this whole collection of stuff that had come, appearing out of nowhere. They take your cigarettes, they hide your cigarettes. There's toilet paper flying down the hall and stuff. And that's what they're doing. It's this weird stuff. They want to get your attention. They want you to go, "What's going on here? Something's going on here. The world doesn't work the way it's, if the world worked the way it was, this wouldn't be happening." And that's what they're doing. They're just doing this curiosity thing, like crop circles. Why do you put a crop circle down with these weird patterns, and nobody can figure it out? So it doesn't matter whether you believe a crop circle or you don't believe a crop circle. Everybody goes, "Wow, I don't know how the heck they made that, whether they hoaxed it or what, but it's just wild." And they get wilder and bigger and bigger. And that's what they're doing. They're doing this thing of wow, of getting people to stop and say, "Hey, what's going on here?"
It's the same thing happening at Skinwalker Ranch then. There's lots of paranormal things happening there. The phenomena is so intense there sometimes, but I know it's in a film, we only see half of it, but that might be over 1, 2, 3 years, what they're actually showing.
Yeah, and the Skinwalker Ranch, I point out with Skinwalker, because people always say there's certain areas that are infested. And it's not just Skinwalker Ranch, because as I said, we got these shadow people from a ranch right beside it. And the guy that showed me those photographs has agreed to take a TV crew on there, because they can't get on Skinwalker Ranch, but they claim they can film the same stuff going on. And the idea there is that it's what you sow, you reap. So what people don't realize is that you have this Aboriginal culture. So you had the Utes, 1857, when the white people arrived there. There was 23,000 Utes. After the Civil War, there was only about 8,000 left. They just massacred them all. And so you had this massacre of all these people dying in that area, that Uinta Basin. And the other thing you have the Navajo and the Utes were putting curses on each other. And so you have this whole thing where you've got these overlays of all this paranormal stuff. And of course, it's infested. And that's where you see the government. People always see the government as doing UFO. And if you go to Jacques Vallée's diaries with Skinwalker Ranch, you'll see he's there 1997, 1998. And Jacques Vallée is saying to Bob Bigelow, he's saying, what are we doing at Skinwalker Ranch? There's no UFOs here. Like, we're wasting our time. Like, what are we doing here? And the thing was that the OSAP went there not because of the UFOs necessarily. They went there. If you look at the briefing slide, they call it the slide 9, where they have the briefing slide where they're trying to get the Congress to put up money, and that's the same thing. Unless you can get Congress to believe this is evil and scare the living daylights, and you're going to get any money. So they're trying to scare them. So they're doing this whole thing. And why OSAP went there is because Lakatsky and his buddies, all the military guys, were in the Middle East, and they were reading the Skinwalker, Hunt for the Skinwalker, and they were passing this book around. And they said, boy, we'd like to go there. So if you're an intelligence guy and you want to develop, you tell a story about the 4 bulls. This is the important manifestation thing. So you got 4 bulls, and the guy comes out, and his 4 bulls are gone. He goes, where's my bulls? And then he looks at this trailer, and he goes, what? And he goes and he peeks through the trailer, and sure enough, the bulls are all jammed into this trailer, and the trailer's locked. So of course, if you're a defense intelligence agency, you say, wow, would we love to be able to put 4 bulls inside a trailer without opening the door? How do they do that? And so they go in there to investigate that. The other thing is the portal. They had this portal, and this being crawled out of this portal. And I know from my own experience dealing with CIA people that they're absolutely fascinated with portals. Portals is the story. It's not the UFOs, it's the portals. So they're fascinated in this portal story. Or the woman comes home with her groceries. And if you're a defense intelligence guy, if you can figure this thing out, she comes home with her groceries. She takes all the groceries out of the bag and puts them in the counter. And then she goes to the next room. She comes back, and all the groceries are back in the bag again. And so if you're a defense intelligence, you go, wow, would we love to be able to do that? Or the thing where they do the apportation. In the apport book, the weird book, they're called Weird, I do a document from 1974. So you can see how far advanced the Defense Intelligence Agency is. Defense Intelligence writes a book on apportations. And what it says in this document, DIA document, it says, if we could develop teleportation, or this apportation, we could go to the enemy. This is paraphrasing. We could go to the enemy. We could go into their safe. We could get the documents. We could bring them back to Washington. We could photograph the documents, put them back in the vault, and they wouldn't even know we were there. So that's what, if you're an intelligence guy, you're looking at, how do you do this? Or you have these guys that are hunting the Skinwalker. So they come on these military guys, and they're all armed, and they're all special forces guys, tough as nails. We're going to hunt the Skinwalker. And the Skinwalker, it's reflective. So the Skinwalker says, oh, you want to play Hunt the Skinwalker? Oh, we'd love to play that. Oh, yeah, we'd love to play that game. And so, of course, then suddenly these guys are going, and suddenly there's this cold force, and this fear comes over them. And those guys are so scared, they wouldn't even go back on the ranch. They were just petrified. And it was like, we can play the Skinwalker. And I heard that they heard in their head, all of these guys, these military guys heard in their head, leave, you are not welcome. So if you're the military guys and you say, boy, we'd love to be able to talk in someone's head and go to Putin and say, okay, we're talking from God. We want you to surrender. We want you to do this or that. It's all military to the government. So that's why the military went there. It wasn't so much for the UFOs. It was for the paranormal phenomena. How the heck do you do these weird things? How do you mutilate a cow where it's somebody standing like 50 feet away when it happens and they don't even know that it happened? That's the kind of stuff they're looking at. It shows you the world is weird, and that if you're the military, if you can figure this stuff out, you're ahead of the game. Whoever figures out this technology, how they're doing this, can rule the world, because they look at everything as weapons. You and I may look at, we're going to save the poor people, or we're going to do whatever. They just look at, oh man, but we could build a weapon, or Putin could build a weapon, or Xi could build a weapon in China and use this against us. So we got to figure this out before the Chinese, because the Chinese had little kids that were putting levitating stuff and moving stuff under glass tubes and stuff. These little kids, they were recruiting them, and this telekinesis stuff. And if you're the military, you go, we can't let the Chinese develop telekinesis. If they can do that, or the Russians had this thing where this guy could go into a bank and just telepathically tell the teller to hand over all the money. And that's what they were working on. So if you can develop that kind of stuff, then you can influence the president of the United States or the prime minister of Great Britain. You can go in there and just get in the same room as him and tap his mind. That's what the military is all about. That's why the government is so interested. And that's why it's so black. The Canadians in 1950 wrote a top secret memo that said, we were told by American officials the following things. Flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. So it's the most highly classified subject in the United States, and nobody is ever going to see it. You have no need to know, as Dr. Eric Walker, this very high-level official, told us. Why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? Go study something else. You're never going to be told the truth. you're up against the windmills, give it up. You're not going to get it. And that's the whole thing, because we've got it. If you got a $900 billion defense budget in the United States, they are not going to shut down a $900 billion defense budget and all go get jobs. They are making money. They're making billions of dollars, and they are not going to give this up. They control it, and whoever has the gold makes the rules.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. It just makes you wonder when I know you spoke about the presidents, who actually runs the world? Who gives the hearsay to say don't talk about UFOs, or don't you think we ought to start talking about it?
Well, that's the problem that we've got, is we've built this world, and now we're trying to sort of say it's an unfair world, but we built it. For example, when they did this amendment last year that got killed by the Republicans in the House, what you had is a situation where they said that the contractors would have to give eminent domain up. They would have to give back. They would have to give the crafts. And so the question is, how did the contractors get the crafts? They were given the crafts. Because if you're in the government, I worked for the government. I worked in a university. I know how this works. You don't want to do the human resource stuff, so you contract everything out. Half of the U.S. military is contracted out. So you contract. If you're the president of the United States and you're a lawyer, you don't know how to back engineer a craft. So what you do is you give the craft to Lockheed Skunk Works, because they've got the experts, and you say, figure this back engineer this thing, and now we're trying to get the crafts back. Lockheed has it, and Lockheed says we're not going. We want eminent domain. We want to make the money, because there's millions of dollars to be made once you back engineer this technology that's involved. So that's where you have the contractors. So the president knows that the contractors have this stuff, but it's this idea of classification. When the Schumer amendment went in, Biden actually said, yes, I agree that we have to tell the people and we have to brief the Congress, because that the Congress spends the money and they have to be responsible for what they're spending the money on. But there's national security implications. And the national security implications is that there's this very high-end technology, and that it's called a waived unacknowledged special access program, which means that even the existence of the program. So, Bob, if you go and say you're working for one of these programs and you say this program exists, they're going to put you in jail. Even the existence of the program is top secret. You're not allowed to say the program. And that's what they've got. And they're not going to give. That's where Walker said, why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? Admit it, he said. Admit it. You're just curious. That's all. You just want to know. You have no reason. And then he even said to us, and I pose this to people all the time now. He said to us, it's like the dog catching the car. So when you figure it out, what are you going to do with it? And people will say, well, then I'll know who I am, or then I'll know. That they don't care. They're going to use it for technology. They're not there to satisfy your curiosity. And people really don't know. They just want to know. They don't really have a reason why they need to know the technology and stuff like that. But the guys on the back, the guys that are scientists, they all have patents. And these patents are worth millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so if you're the working on this back engineering and you're getting close, are you going to put your stuff on the table and then have some other guy come along and do the patent and lose the patent? No, they're going to wait until they patent it, because they're all making money. All these guys have patents. Gary Nolan's got patents. Hal Puthoff's got patents. They've all got these patents. They're making money on sitting on boards and stuff like that. And once you build a $900 billion defense budget, it's like Eisenhower said in his last speech. He said, beware the military industrial congressional. They took the congressional word out of the speech. He said, beware the military industrial congressional complex. And that it means that once you get this thing going and everybody's making money, if you're a senator, for example, people will talk about like Lockheed Skunk Works. Lockheed Skunk Works gives money. Lockheed gives money to every single senator and congressman. Every single one gets money, because if you get money, how are you going to say, you guys got to give this stuff up? You're getting money from them, so you're in the bag. And he who has the gold, it's even like Trump came out this recently and said, if you give me $1 billion to my campaign, I will let the energy guys write the bill. And it's like, that's how it works. If you got the money, people say, oh, this politician won't talk to me about UFOs. I guarantee if you give the politician $50,000, they'll talk to you about UFOs or anything else you want, because we don't have any money. The people who have the money, those are the guys that are running the show, the billionaires, the guys behind. And you're not going to shut down a $900 billion defense budget. That is just massive amounts of money where everybody's got their hand in the jar. All the congressmen are embedded. All the contractors are embedded. Everybody's embedded, and nobody's going to give that up, because it's a good deal. Everybody's living in a big house, and you're simply not going to shut the military industrial complex down. That's the big problem that we've got, is we've allowed this to develop. to the stage it's at now, and now you can't stop it. It's just next year they're going to want $1 trillion, and then $1.1 trillion, and then $1.2 trillion, and then $1.3 trillion, and it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing, and everybody's going to vote for it because they're getting money out of it.
Yeah. Tell us about the most powerful paranormal story you have ever researched that
Okay.
happened in 2020. At Mount
2020. That's my favorite story that most people don't know. I interviewed 3 of the 9 witnesses. This is the Mission Rama story. As the Mission Rama people are extremely good at opening sometimes these portal things where the beings will come in. So what they do is they raise their vibration. It's this co-resonance thing. You'll do oming, meditation, praying, and stuff like that for 2 days. And you have a group of 120 people or whatever, and they do this praying and they meditate, and you're trying to raise their consciousness up. And then the beings lower their consciousness and they meet in between. The beings open what they call a Zendra, a portal. And 7 people at a time go inside this portal, and the beings are there and they interact with the beings and stuff like that. And they do this. They've done it quite a few times. I wrote 2 books on the Mission Rama people. Anyway, 2020 extended from these other stories. Some of the same people were involved. Everybody goes to Mount Shasta. So Mount Shasta is where the sort of the center place where a lot of this stuff happens. So this Mission Rama group was there in 2020. They wanted 111 people, and there was a being by the name of Adama said, if you get 111 people, we will show up and we will make a contact. So they couldn't because COVID was going on there. I think they only had 45 people or whatever, but Adama did show up. So what happened was they do this ceremony where they're lying there and they're meditating. And then the one girl says, can we film? So then she gets this message. She's an intuitor. She can pick up the message. And they say, yeah, you can film. So she films all these people lying on the ground. She goes and then she pans the camera back. It's a 1 minute and 27-second film. And there's this being. It looks like it's wearing a white cloak right beside this tree. And as it pans back, the being has moved. It's moved to a different tree. And there's this shadow going up on the back of the trees as if there's a light coming from down below and this big shadow in behind this thing. And they discovered that. Then that night, there's 9 people, and I have 3 on camera that told the story. So they're sitting there. It's 2:00 in the morning. Adama hasn't shown up yet. 8 in the morning, everybody's going to get in their car and leave. And they're 2:00 in the morning having a birthday party, and they're sitting there, and all of a sudden the intuitor, she's out of Mexico City, and she goes, they're here. And then the other one say, what do you mean they're here? How do you know they're here? She says, I just know they're here. Because when you're experienced, you can feel the vibration. Once you touch the craft, you can feel the vibration. She said, they're here. I know they're here. And she says, look, there's the light. And on the edge of the forest, they're on what's called a sand flat. It's an open area. There's no trees. And these trees all around. And so on the edge of the trees, she says, look, there's a light there. And they say, oh, no, it's just somebody's campsite. They just got a campfire going. She says, no, I think that's them. That's them. Oh, hang on. They say they want us to come over there. And then it's like pitch dark. Have you ever been up on the side of a mountain 4,000 feet up? I mean, you can't see your hand in front of your face. And there's all these potholes. And they go, we can't go across there. We're going to break our leg. We can't go across this field in the middle of the dark. We got nothing. And so then she says, I guess she relays it to me. And then she says, oh, they say they're coming here. And then they go, oh, okay. And all of a sudden it's like, they said it was like elephant. And there's noise and these things are coming. And then they say suddenly they're levitated into the air. This is 9 witnesses. We know who the witnesses are. I've got 3 of them. I've told the story on camera. They're levitated in the air and they start to freak out. It's a fear takes place and they don't know what to do. So they all grab hands. They're holding hands and they're levitated up into the air in this circle and they start to om, and they're oming. And then all of a sudden Adama shows up and Adama and his beings are there. And they start oming and they're petrified. The whole people, they're petrified and the beings are there. And I remember asking the one guy, said, Adama was there? Yeah. And he's like 10 feet tall and he wears this long hair and stuff. I said, were there others with him? He said, yeah. I said, how many other people were there? And he said, there were as many beings as there was trees in the forest. And I said, really? It's like, and they're all etheric type beings, like energy beings. Adama and then all these energy beings around, and they're in the air and they're levitated and they're oming and stuff like that. And then I said to the guy, I said, so how long did it last? Oh no, the other thing he said, we started to oming, and then he said, it sounded like we were underwater. And as soon as they said that, I said, oh, they're in a Zendra. I didn't say to them, but I know they're in a Zendra because every time they go in these portal things, people will describe, you talk and it sounds like you're underwater. So they were in the Zendra. So they'd open the Zendra, they're up in this Zendra and they're hanging on. And then I asked the guy, I said, so how long did it last? And he said, I have no clue how long it lasted. I had no idea how long it lasted. And when they got down, they were in their tents and they were still petrified. And they were in their tents and they could hear these beings walking around the campsite. And a couple of them actually got up and they left in the middle of the night. They left. And then in the morning, they went down to tell the people. There was people staying at a sort of a little hotel down at the bottom of the mountain. They went and told them, and Adama showed up again. So these are the kind of stories you get. It's like, and multiple people seeing this. And these are ordinary, like Latino people who are gardeners and just, ordinary people who have businesses and stuff like that. It's just, and they're telling the story and they didn't want to talk. They said, well, we're Latino. We're very, we're not proud and stuff like that. But by the end of the interview, they were all fighting to tell the story. It was unbelievable. And the CIA actually, there's somebody from the CIA. They actually wanted me to put these people on camera and tell the story, and then they would tell me what the CIA knew about portals, because that's what it is. This is one of the key issues of the idea. How do they move from here to there? They're going through these doorways, these portals. You can open these things up. So that was the most amazing story I've ever heard. And they were going to do a book. We wanted to do an interview like in Hollywood about it, and they just all bailed out. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. So they said they're going to do a book. So you may see a book about this story. 2020 at Mount Shasta. These 41 people, 9 people levitated in the air, and there's no doubt it happened. When you see the interview of these people, it's just a fascinating story.
Tell us about, lastly, tell us about your brand new book coming out.
I have a book coming out in the next couple of days. It's called Beyond Managing Magic. So I've written 4 books on disclosure. This is the 3rd book on disclosure. I wrote UFOs, Area 51, and Government Formats. That's the first book ever to talk about Area 51. We were talking about Area 50. We were investigating Area 51 when it was happening, when Lazar, that whole thing. I was dealing with John Lear and Knapp and all these people when it was happening. And then I wrote a book called Managing Magic, because that's what the CIA considers. This is not UFOs, it's magic. You got to remember, this is not just UFOs, it's all the paranormal phenomena. So what they're trying to do is like trying to manage magic, all these weird magical things. And so I wrote the book Managing Magic, talking about how the government is gradually disclosing this stuff. And people say, no, they're not gradually disclosing this stuff. And I say, yes, they absolutely are disclosing stuff, because Tom DeLonge was talking to a 2-star general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, and the head of Space Command, and they were all operational at the time. They were working for the government. So they were in the government talking to him. So yeah, they are. And so this book is called Beyond Managing Magic. And I go into the whole Tom DeLonge story. I tell what happened with OSAP, ATIP, and how the government is setting this thing up. And then the book after that will be more Managing Magic, Beyond Managing Magic, where I'm going to talk about what's happening now in Congress. And then the 5th book, hopefully, we'll do, although it's sort of stalled now, is we're actually in a position where the government's doing it again. They're doing the Tom DeLonge thing all again. They are leaking material. I know what's going on. It hasn't really happened, but very high level officials are now making a move to get more material out. That will be book number 5. I've documented what has happened so far, and there's been a stall. I don't know why it's stalled, but there's supposed to be a meeting in Washington, and a bunch of high level officials have come forward, and retired officials. These are, I think, are retired officials who have said they want material out, and they've got a filmmaker who they've picked to put this material out. So the government is gradually acclimatizing us by putting the story, fictionalizing the story, not putting facts and stuff like that, but fictionalizing the stuff and getting us to do it. So the book is called Beyond Managing Magic, Entangled in Secrecy, and it should be out within the next week, and it'll go into this whole story about how they're disclosing the UFO material to the public.
Tell us where everybody can get your books, like contact modalities. And
most of my books are on Amazon, but most of them are listed on a place called It's All Connected. So if you Google search It's All Connected, one word, because that's the main message of the beings. It's all connected. It's all one thing. It's all connected, and put books. It'll pop to the page where it has all the various books I've done. And I'm on Twitter at Grant Cameron. And I do a blog, White House UFO blog. I put a lot of articles on there as to what's coming up. And I don't speak very much anymore because I have a hard time getting in the States. I always get, this problem. I'm stealing American jobs, so I don't go in the States. But I'll be doing a cruise going from Alaska, from Seattle up to Alaska. And Danny Sheehan's going to be there, and Jimmy Church, and Richard Doty. And there's going to be a lot of high-level people, bunch of speakers. So for a week. Anybody that wants to do that, but mostly, and then the It's All Connected, that publishing company, I actually help other people, like Nancy Tremaine, the first abductee ever. 2 of her books are on there. I help people publish books because that's the whole idea, is the beings want the story told. So when somebody has an experience, I say, have you ever written a book? And they go, no, I think you should just write it up and I'll help you publish it. So I show them how to publish the book, self-publish it, and put it up even for your kids. So you have published one book, you tell your story, put it on a shelf. You don't have to sell the book. It's so easy to self-publish now. So I sort of help people do that to get them to know that it's like the Bible says, what profit of the man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? If you've been given this material, it's up to you to share the material. It doesn't help for you to figure it out. It's up to you to share. And I appreciate what you're doing in terms of sharing the message. You're doing your part. I'm doing my part. And eventually you and I will raise the consciousness and people will suddenly realize this thing's for real, and the world will move on and will be a better place.
Thank you, Grant, for that. And tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock UK time, you're being interviewed by Paul Sinclair, Truth Proof, tomorrow night.
Yeah, hopefully I've got some new stories. I got lots of stories, so he can watch this one and then he can pick up on where he wants to go. Because I've written 20 books now, 21st I'm working on now. And I don't really try to, make money or whatever, because people don't really read books anymore. But I've done a lot of stuff and I've sort of been led along the way. I've sort of been given hints as to where to go. A lot of synchronicities. The Apport book was a synchronicity. The story with the tuned in. I have no background in music. I wrote the book called Tuned in: The Paranormal World of Music. I've actually been interviewed by one of the Rolling Stones' wives, and that book came to me when Chris Bledsoe said, "I got a message from the Guardians for you." I said, "You got a message from me from the Guardians?" He said, "Yeah. They want you to know the messages in the music." I said, "Well, Chris, I don't listen to music. I don't play music. I am not interested." And he said, "Well, you should listen to Kashmir, or you should like Kashmir, and you should listen to After the Gold Rush by Neil Young." And I said, "Neil Young, After the Gold Rush?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Neil Young grew up in the city I'm in. I'm in this city that nobody wants to live in. Nobody wants to visit." And I said, "Neil Young grew up here." And that's what dragged me down the rabbit hole to investigate. And I wrote an entire book on music, on paranormal music, how people get it in dreams and stuff like that.
Yes.
And the Mission Rama thing, I got a message from Mantarell, one of the beings. They said, we know you're coming to the mountain. There's going to be a program sighting. And I went, whoa. And the event happened right over my head. And I wrote a book about that. And then I went back 2 years later and I wrote another book. And if these other people had done the 2020, I would have done a book about that too. Because the Mission Rama stories are some of the most bizarre stories. They're in touch with something, boy. But again, there's no demonic stuff. There's no bad stuff. To them, it's all angelic and beings, but that's the way they see it. So it's the idea that, whatever you see is whatever you believe is basically what you're going to see. And you're helping to manifest what it is. So if you're seeing something very negative, you've got to realize that you're part of it and you got to change your consciousness and see it in a different way.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Grant, for coming on the show.
Yeah.
It's been very interesting.
Beautiful.
Everybody in the chat room just said, "Great show, Bob. Excellent guest." Alison said, "Yes, excellent guest. Great again." So I'll be listening tomorrow night on Paul's show.
Yeah, and we'll do it again sometime when I get the final. If this 5th book on disclosure comes out, it'll be pretty revealing, because it's we may not be able to name names, but sounds like to me there's former CIA directors and NSA people and people like that, and they're actually claiming that they want to put some stuff out. So that'll be an interesting book when that one comes out. Yeah. Although I hate the disclosure stuff. I think it's more important to realize that it's consciousness thing is more important than the disclosure thing. Because as Dr. Walker says, if you figure out that UFOs exist, I mean, we know the government knows UFOs exist. So what? Big deal. I mean, what difference does it make if the government knows, or if they don't know, if they're hiding it, they're not hiding it? How does that help you? You got to figure it out. Why am I here? Why did I come into the world? When you leave, you realize they're only going to ask you one question. Bob, how'd it work out? You planned your whole life. How'd it work out? And you go, and everybody says the same thing. Oh, I could have done better. I forgot to do this and I was going to do that. And so it comes down to, why did we come into the world? And what are we supposed to be doing? And are we doing it? Nothing else matters. It doesn't matter what the government's doing. It doesn't matter what your friends are doing. It's why did I come into the world and what am I supposed to be doing?
Well, thank you again.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll keep in touch with you. And
Beautiful.
I'll be listening tomorrow night on Paul's show.
Beautiful. Thank you, sir.